Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Wednesday, and this is Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, live at 5 on Facebook. So I want to welcome everybody. Thank you for coming in, and I am going to, do my start a video stuff where I try to share this stuff on my other pages and let everybody have an opportunity to get on board. Hey Henry, I see you. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. You're my first. As you guys come on, hey Harold, as you guys come on, do me a favor and please share this on your Facebook timeline, and make sure that everybody who might like to see what's going on over here can see what's going on over here, right? Got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Going to be talking a little bit about, I'm tempted to talk about the election, right? But it's such a distraction. You know, some of the foolishness that's been going on yesterday and today, I just had to turn my TV off because when I saw that Lion Ted Cruz had been announced as the winner in Texas, I just had to turn the TV off. I couldn't watch, and I just figured this morning I would find out exactly what was going on with that. But you know, you guys who follow me on Facebook, you know that I in the past have wished for Lil Tink Tink, you know who that is, right, to resign, get impeached, whatever you want to call it. And now I am here for it, you guys. I want him to finish out this term because I tell you, at the end of this next 2 years, he is going to be so beat up and haggard and worn and torn until I want him to get everything that office has to give him. So I'm excited about what's going on because, listen, you know he's not going to be able to control himself once Auntie Maxine gets a hold of him. And so I just want to see exactly what that's going to look like. I'm excited about the various committees that the Democrats now have control over. And for those of you who don't know, Ethics Committee, Intelligence Committee, Judiciary Committee, Oversight, Ways and Means, oh, they're going to have all kind of fun with this administration now. And so I hope he's taking his glycerin, hydroglycerin, whatever that is you take for your heart. I hope he's got a real good supply that will get him through these next 2 years, because I do believe that they are going to try him, and I do believe that he is not going to be able to contain himself because he's reminds me almost of a child with Tourette's syndrome. You know, he cannot help but act out. He cannot help but counterpunch, if you will. That's his thing. And so I'm excited about it. I wanted to start off, also I'm going to have my my special guest from last week. He's going to join me if I can just figure out again, and I hope I don't have the problems that I had last week, but if I can figure out again how to invite him, to be a part of this, I will endeavor to do that. So just hang on for a minute while I search and send out an invite to my guest. So whenever you see this, Mr. Harper, just come on in. The water's fine. Listen, it's not often that an LAPD deputy chief resigns in lieu of. And so I just have to spend a moment talking about what all my LAPD people are talking about in those quiet, dark corners about Deputy Chief George Villegas and sexing his subordinate in a police car. What the what? Deputy Chief followed and surveilled by a special unit through internal affairs, which understand a police chief would not allow that kind of situation to happen and not know about it. So his good buddy Mike Moore, Chief Mike Moore, obviously was well aware that George was being followed. And I want to know what his poker face looks like, because I don't know how he could look him in the eye day in and day out knowing the foolishness that had been going on, because they had been following him for quite some time before they finally let the cat out of the bag. And so it's reported that this guy went running down to the retirement counselor's office. Hurry up and turn in his paperwork once he found out that actually there was video. It was no longer just rumor control and gossip. There was actually video of him doing that thing that he does so well on duty, in uniform, in a police car. So yeah, that was something. Now, let me talk a little bit, because you know, some of you may have seen me on Inside Edition the other day with regards to this high school teacher in Maywood, California. Maywood Academy, I believe, is the name of the school where this teacher lost it. Freshman student was being incorrigible, being disrespectful to the music teacher, and I'm certain that there was some history between these two. I'm certain that this freshman, this 14-year-old probably, acts like that all the time. And he doesn't just do that when he's at school. You can best believe that when he's at home, he's disrespectful with his family. And so what this freshman did is he got up in the teacher's face, and you can Google it. I'm not going to put the video up. But what happened is the teacher had told him he didn't have on his proper uniform, and he was asking this young student to leave the class. And the student got real profane, using a lot of N-words, got up in the teacher's face. The teacher is a 64-year-old gentleman, black man. I believe the student was also black. And the student was just very disrespectful, and I think he was feeling very empowered by the fact that other students were oohing and ahhing as he was getting in the teacher's face. And the teacher walked away at some point, and the young man bounced a basketball down in a way that it bounced back up and hit the teacher. Teacher walked away, young man comes back. Teacher comes back to the young man, and he doesn't say anything. He just lets him have it. He just opens up a can of whoop ass on this kid, and he can't stop. And so he just, he beat that kid from here to there. And there were students that were trying to intervene. There was a young lady wearing looked like maybe a crossing guard vest, who tried to separate the two, and she just could not get this teacher off this kid. And so ultimately the teacher was charged and arrested for assault, battery, something on this 14-year-old kid. And so, listen, there was a lot of discussion on Facebook about this whole situation. And, this kid, I give you that he was disrespectful. I get that. And I can even understand how some people think that really he deserved to get his ass handed to him. But as the professional, as the adult, what that teacher did was no different than what a police officer would do with some citizen who was mouthy, who was being disrespectful. Teachers, like principals, don't get to punish students when they're misbehaving. There were so many other things that this teacher could have done. He understands that attorneys are not cheap. And I don't know when the last time any of you checked the fees for a criminal defense, but just to get through a prelim is probably going to cost him $30,000 or $40,000, and that's even before you get to trial. So listen, I know that there are things that he could have done in terms of putting paper on this kid. I know for a fact that students can be put out of school, not only that school district, but they can be prohibited from attending a school in the entire state of California. I know this to be true because I've seen it happen to somebody. And so I would just put paper on that kid that would make his knees buckle, and he would wind up having to relocate to another state when I got done writing him up. There's no way that I would have let him make me do the thing that this teacher did, because the teacher has so much more to lose. And I saw a lot of people saying that I bet this young man learned his lesson, he won't do that. I promise you that young man learned nothing. That's who he is. And we may get to hear or see somewhere down the road where he's going to be in more trouble, the young man, because he's going to do something or say something to somebody who really won't have to restrain themselves like the teacher did, to the extent that the teacher did restrain himself. And so I know a lot of people are putting what they call money on his books, right? He's going to need a whole lot more than that. I think he's up to like $80,000 right now. He's got bills. I'm sure he's got a mortgage. I'm sure he's got, everything that it takes to run a household. Couple that with legal defense monies that he's going to need. And on top of that, you absolutely know that there is a civil suit coming. And so my guess is, having looked at his video on that GoFundMe page, my guess is that this music teacher understands now that that really probably wasn't the smartest thing to do. And so that's my 2 cents. I couldn't really get into a lot of detail when I was on Inside Edition, because although they interviewed me for about 10 minutes, you saw they put up like 15 seconds, soundbite of what I had to say about that. But I don't condone violence by anybody. And I think as an adult, as a professional, there were so many other things that he could have done. Listen, I say this for civilians when the police encounter you and are aggressive. There is no shame in walking away. There's no shame in that man keeping his job. There is nothing wrong with wanting to be able to sustain yourself and earn an income. And now this teacher is probably going to lose his job because LAUSD, those administrators down there, probably are going to make an example of him. Because if they don't, and if he has another situation, another episode where he snaps and hurts another student, LAUSD is not going to assume that culpability, because they had an opportunity to deal with him the first time he showed them that he lacked impulse control. And so they have no alternative but to fire him. And so I hope he's 64. He could be retirement age. I hope he's got enough time in grade and time on the job and all of that. I'm assuming at 64 he's still working because he probably needs to, right? People are working longer nowadays, and so that was really not a good look for him. And I know a lot of you may disagree, and that's okay. I'm not looking for agreement. I'm just telling you what I think, and I'm telling you what I believe is fairly certain based on what's happened thus far. So that's my take on Maywood and the music teacher assaulting a student. Now, there's a couple of things that are going on in the news in terms of police officers and convictions. And, it seems like the tide is starting to turn, and we're starting to see more police officers being convicted, being charged of crimes. I mentioned this on my podcast, and for those of you who haven't, please do subscribe to Sergeant Dorsey Speaks on the podcast platform of your choice. And check out my podcast from yesterday where I talked about what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri with the activists that are coming up dead, by mysterious circumstances. There was a young man just about a week or so ago, Danye Jones, I believe is his name, who was found hanged in his mother's backyard. And there was something on Facebook, for those of you who may have seen it, a GoFundMe that the mother set up looking for assistance in getting an independent autopsy on the death of her son. Ferguson says that it was a suicide. Mother doesn't believe it. I don't believe that that young man would hang himself for his mother to find him that way. And so if you want to hear a little bit more about that young man, as well as 3 other activists who have also died under questionable circumstances in Ferguson, Missouri, do check out Sergeant Dorsey Speaks, my podcast. I want to talk about what's going on right now in Philadelphia, because a couple of Philadelphia police officers have been fired and are facing some pretty serious criminal charges. In the last 2 years, the commissioner, I believe his name is Richard Ross, I believe that's the Philadelphia Police Commissioner, Richard Ross. In the last 2 years, he's fired 2 of his officers for being involved in fatal shootings. Last year, there was a gentleman, police officer by the name of Eric Ruch, R-U-C-H. Eric last year was involved in a shooting in June of last year. He shot and killed 25-year-old Dennis Plowden Jr. Now, Dennis was unarmed, and he was driving a vehicle that was believed to have been involved in a homicide. Now, Dennis wasn't suspected of being the shooter or responsible for the homicide, but he was driving a vehicle that was supposedly believed to be involved in a shooting. And somehow this officer with 10 years on the job, 30 years old, he decided to shoot at the vehicle, and he shot and killed Dennis. Now, there were 3 other officers that were there, and the reason this is a problem for Eric Rush is that the other three didn't fire. They decided to do what police officers should do. They took a position of cover. They reassessed the situation. They took a moment to try to figure out what was going on, because remember, we're never in any hurry. That's how I was taught. There's never any urgency about taking action immediately. And so the other three did the right thing. They didn't fire, but Officer Eric Rush did, and he shot and killed 25-year-old Dennis Plowden. And so now this officer is facing some serious charges. And this was right after another officer by the name of Ryan Pownall, P-O-W-N-A-L-L, was fired also for being involved in a shooting. Ryan Pownall, I'm killing these names, you guys, bear with me. He was involved in a deadly shooting with David Jones, and that was during a traffic stop. And in the instance of Pownall, this was his second shooting in 2017. The first time he shot someone, the person didn't die, so of course the officer lived to offend again. I don't know how they adjudicated that shooting, but the person didn't die, so he was not fired. He lived to offend again, and this time he shot and killed David Jones. And so now this officer too, Ryan Pownall, was also fired by Commissioner Richard Ross. And so I'm really, that's encouraging to see a police commissioner take that kind of action against police officers. And so I was really feeling Richard Ross until I came across the article today that speaks to the whole Starbucks thing. Remember that thing with Starbucks about a year ago or earlier in this year where some Philadelphia officers went to a Starbucks and they arrested this young man, or these two black guys that were in there because they said they weren't buying anything? Well, there was an independent review board that came back and decided that there were several recommendations they had for the police commissioner in Philadelphia, and evidently now Richard Ross, he seems to be having a moment, because first of all, he doesn't agree with the independent review board. And see, that's the problem that I have with independent civilian review boards, is because they have no teeth behind whatever it is that they come up with. They can make a recommendation to a police chief or a commissioner or a sheriff, and that department official gets to say thank you, and then they do what the heck they want. And so that's kind of what's going on right now with Commissioner Richard Ross and this Civilian Review Board. The Civilian Review Board made several suggestions, several recommendations, many of which Richard Ross has no interest in enforcing. And one of the things that's really telling is that the Civilian Review Board was asking the police department to come up with some rules and regulations and educate the community about 911 abuse calls, because I've said before that, you know, police departments can end this 911 abuse stuff immediately. I think the easiest way to do it is if somebody calls 911 on a black person for just being black in public, and if the person on the other end, the 911 dispatcher, is not able to definitively discern that this person is full of it and sends an officer erring on the side of caution, right? They send an officer out, and it turns out that this person is calling because they're another permit Patty or barbecue Betty or whatever these names are for these people who are calling the police when we just out doing what we do. Charge that person for the police services. Hey, Aunt Mo. Charge the person for the police services, because you get 6 or 7 police officers and a supervisor out there, and have a citizen have to pay the cost of that service. That's what they do when, you know, you go fishing in a pond, when they tell you don't be fishing in there and you get yourself stuck or something and they got to rescue you. They don't have a problem charging you for the fine, for the fees for the service to get you out of there. Or I don't know if any of you have ever been transported from home by a paramedic unit, but you know, when they take you from your house to the hospital, they charge you for that. So when somebody calls the police and they know that they're abusing 911, and it's pretty obvious, folks barbecuing in a park, and they call the police, or somebody's sitting in a Starbucks and they call the police, charge them for the services. But nonetheless, Commissioner Richard Ross said no, he's not interested in doing any of that. And he also said that he wouldn't even agree that racism has a profound effect on citizen police conduct. This is a black man. Richard Ross is a black man, and he says he cannot agree that racism plays a profound effect on the way police interact with the community. Now, I don't know why. Philadelphia, can you have a conversation with Commissioner Richard Ross and find out what his situation is, and how is it that he is so adamant about not wanting to acknowledge that racial bias, that implicit bias, whatever you want to call this bias, racial profiling, whatever it is, he does not want to admit that it exists. And he says that the reason that he won't is because he doesn't want to create a chilling effect where now community members don't feel like they can call and trust that the police will come whenever they do make a 911 call. And so I don't know how educating someone on the proper use of 911 would be problematic, but this is something that the chief said he's not going to do. He flatly rejected many of the recommendations, and understand these recommendations are non-binding. And so he's under no obligation to do what this independent civilian review board suggested, and it seems very reasonable to me. So I don't know what's up with that. I mean, he took, like 3 or 4 steps forward, and then all of a sudden he went backwards 5, in my opinion. Over in Dallas Police Department, it's been real quiet over there. Haven't heard much about what's going on with Botham Jean shooting. I do know from looking at my news feed today that you guys got a new DA. Faith Johnson was voted out last night, right? So I don't know if that's a good thing, Dallas, that you have a new DA. I don't know anything about the person, obviously, that replaced her. If somebody is watching right now, share this if you're just coming into the room. Could you share this on your timeline so others can hear? But if I have any Dallas family on the phone right now and you know anything about the person that was elected over Faith Johnson there in the district attorney's office, I'd love to know what you think about how this new DA may proceed in terms of the investigation involving Botham Jean and Amber Geiger. We've not heard a word about that whole investigation. So now I don't know if Faith Johnson was just kind of dragging her feet because she wasn't really motivated, not knowing whether or not she was going to have a job in a few weeks. I mean, that would kind of make sense to me, right? Why put in a bunch of effort if folks not going to re-elect you? I'll just kind of hold on, collect this paycheck for a couple of more weeks, and then after the election, if I still have a job, then I'll decide what it is that I want to do, if anything, with regards to continuing on with this investigation, because it hasn't been presented to a grand jury. So don't know what her replacement is thinking in terms of this presentation to a grand jury with regard to Amber Geiger. But what else is going on over there in Dallas is that they just released the video recording of a shooting that happened earlier this year. Some of you may be familiar with it. It was a young woman by the name of Genevieve Dawes, and Genevieve was 21 years old when she was shot by a Dallas police officer by the name of Christopher Hess. Now, Genevieve was in her car with a friend. I believe they were sleeping in the car. It was early morning, about 5 o'clock, and someone reported a suspicious vehicle or possible stolen vehicle, and the officers came out to investigate this vehicle. And what happened is that because she was asleep in the car, when they got her attention, she was startled. And she started up the car and was going to try to move. And of course, she's not here to tell us, so we don't know if she recognized that these were police officers or not. But nonetheless, she started up the car and she backed it up a little bit, trying to maneuver around the vehicle, the police vehicle that was blocking her. And one of the officers shot 13 times into the car and killed her. And evidently, when you look at the recording from the police vehicle, after this officer shoots into the car, he gets on the radio and he says, the car that he shot into rammed us. The car rammed us twice, I think he said, and that didn't happen. Now, you know, people sometimes wonder, why do police lie when they know that things are being video recorded, or when they know that there's an audio recording? And I think it's because, you know, you get tunnel vision. Police officers get tunnel vision, and they get so caught up in the moment. And of course, you know, you do what you do, and you don't really give a second thought to what it is that you do, because it's just, you play like you practice. And so it was just second nature for him to say something that wasn't true. That probably wasn't the first time that he put hands on somebody, or, you know, did something to somebody and then got on the radio and lied about it, because he understands that when he does that, great deference is given to his version of the story. And so the officer lied on video, and the family is just now seeing this some many months later, and so they are very, very bothered by the fact that what they're seeing on this video doesn't comport with the officer's story. And so when you see the video, it's clear why the police department, Dallas, was reluctant to release that video recording any sooner, because they had to know that there was going to be this kind of reaction from the family. And so again, the car that Genevieve was driving was reported to be a stolen vehicle, but there sounds like there was some kind of mix-up with the paperwork. She thought she had bought it legitimately. I'm assuming they're getting this information from the family, because she's not here to tell us that. But somehow the car had been reported stolen. But nonetheless, even if the car was legitimately stolen, you don't just get to shoot 13 times into a car because it's stolen. So right now, Officer Christopher Hess is facing serious charges, and I'm not sure, aggravated assault. He was indicted on by a jury, grand jury indictment, 1 count of aggravated assault. And evidently, I would assume this is DA Faith Johnson, who had an injunction on a civil case that the family had, or the family was wanting to bring forth. There was an injunction. In other words, the civil case cannot go until the criminal case involving the officer is completed. Now, I don't know if that's a good thing or not, because, hey, Charles Harper, I see that you are now watching. Welcome, sir, and I have invited you, so come on in whenever you get ready. You should see the invite, and you should just be able to join me. So anyway, so there's this injunction, and civil case can't happen until the criminal case involving Christopher Hess is concluded. Now, that could be a good thing or not, because, hold on, trying to see if I can bring this person on camera. Obviously, if there is a criminal conviction, then longer, and of course